Hello and welcome to The Actor and the Engineer. My name is Paul James. I'm the actor.
My name is Josh Knapp. I'm the broadcast engineer.
Here we go, Josh.
All right, another Tarantino movie. Potentially the second to last Tarantino movie, the penultimate Tarantino movie, which I will believe it when I see it. But yeah, so it's been a while since I've seen it, and I've seen it twice. So what about you? Did you just see it recently, or have you had time to ingest Once Upon a Time in Hollywood?
Yes, I saw it recently, and yes, I've had time to ingest, and no, I haven't forgotten a moment of it.
Okay. All right. Well, so the first time I saw it opening night, which was really cool. But I saw it in 35 millimeter. Alamo's doing 30. Well, they have been doing 35 millimeter showings of it. And before the movie started, they had the regular trailers. But then after that, they had special 35 millimeter trailers that looked like they had been like taken home and put in somebody's washing machine. Like it was, or like drug across concrete. I don't know. They were very used. They had seen a good life in the mid 90s because it was Desperado and Mulholland Drive. Those were the two that I remember. There might have been a third one, but those are the two that I remember. And they were just like really trashy prints of those trailers. And it was cool. Desperado, you see a little bit of Quentin Tarantino even in the trailer. And then Mulholland Drive, I don't know why they played that one, but it was definitely trippy. I don't know how you would even make a trailer for Mulholland Drive, but they did, and it tells you nothing about the movie. So there you go. But after those, I was like, oh my God, this is going to look so horrible, and it's just going to really frustrate me because there's just going to be all kinds of noise, on this print, and the projector's not going to be good, and it's going to be, because I haven't seen a 35 millimeter print at Alamo, and the Sony logo came up, and it was like perfect. It looked amazing. So I was very happy about that. But for me, when I left the movie, I had all kinds of questions, and so I had not really felt like the love that I did when I came out of Inglourious Bastards, or even Hateful Eight to a certain extent. So I've had a little bit of time to grapple with it, and I've seen the movie. I saw the movie a second time about a week later, and I think that I've come out the other side really appreciating it, but I still don't think that it's necessarily like his greatest film achievement. I do think it's his most indulgent achievement, which is saying a lot, considering a lot of his movies are very indulgent.
Well, I think you're kind of par for the course with what everybody else is thinking and feeling and saying, especially on movie Twitterverse. Here's my question. Why does it have to be the greatest Tarantino film to date? Every time his movies come out, that debate comes up. Mm-hmm. I walked out of Inglourious Bastards going, whoa. Christoph Waltz, need to know his name, need to know his name, need to know his name, need to know his name. As I was saying, that man's going to win the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. The first line of his dialogue in the beginning of that film is captivating. He's going to win the Oscar just for the opening sequence alone. Guy crossed in front of me and said, that movie effing sucked. It's the worst one Tarantino put out. And that has happened almost every single time Tarantino puts a movie out. And that, to me, is a backwards compliment because he has set his bar so high, and our expectations are so high that we can't, as an audience, adjust to whatever he's showing us for this moment. Okay? So for me, my question is, why do we associate expectations with a filmmaker? Why do we not just take in what he gave us this time? Why does it have to be immediately on Twitter and on Facebook the night the movie opened? Tarantino listings, and of course Twitter is all about listing stuff from 1 to 10 and who should have won the Oscar, and this movie should have been the top 10 of 1990 and blah, 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 blah. And I get it. I love that kind of stuff. I love reading it. I never participate, not because I don't have an opinion, but because I'm more interested in what other people's opinions are instead of getting in some kind of conversation about my opinion. I'd rather hear what people are saying. And sometimes I go, I see how somebody sees it that way. I understand why they think so-and-so should have won the Oscar and blah, blah, blah. That said, to rank Tarantino movies 1 to 10 or 1 to 9, I guess, if you count the Four Rooms hotel movie as one of his films. There's 10 if you want to count that sequence in that movie, because that was directed by Tarantino. Immediately, it was the lowest of the bunch. And somebody posted, well, I found my least favorite Tarantino movie. Is that because it was not a good movie for you, or was that because of everything else he's done up to this point? If it is because of everything else he's done up to that point, that's not fair to this film. This is a separate experience than Pulp Fiction. This is a separate experience than Jackie Brown. And now I have been alive enough decades to see a pattern happen. People slam things when it first comes out, and then 20 years later, they're calling it one of their favorites of all time. Jackie Brown was slammed around by people and their opinion back in the day. Now it's like number 3, next to Pulp Fiction and Reservoir Dogs. And that goes back and forth between 1 and 2. So my question is this not a great film, or is it not a great film based on our experiences with Tarantino movies? I wonder.
Yeah.
That said, I loved it. I can't imagine anybody who is interested in the craft of acting not finding this film fascinating, because that's what it is. It's a love fest of movies. It's a love fest of the 60s. It's the love fest of LA in the 60s, the late 60s, early 70s, well, 69 in particular. It's a love fest of the craft of acting. And so for me, I sat back and smiled and chuckled. Maybe I get jokes people don't get. I don't think that's true. I just think that people are not adjusting themselves to this movie. And we've, and this is something I'll repeat all the way through this podcast. We've talked about this a million times, where we just want to see somebody like Darren Aronofsky do a romantic comedy. Just because, what would a romantic comedy directed by Darren Aronofsky be like? What would it be like? You know? And we talked about this with Steve Jobs and how...
Danny Boyle?
Yes, thank you. I was going to say, yeah. I said Danny in my head, but then I couldn't put Boyle to it. We talked about that. The fact that that's so not like his other movies is the reason why I find it fascinating. It's the reason why I thought it was interesting. You know, we talked about Ang Lee before and how you can't really pinpoint his thumbprint because his subject matter is so diverse throughout all in his films. I mean, we've talked about this. What does Sense and Sensibility have to do with the Hulk? What does the Hulk have to do with Brokeback Mountain? And now this new Will Smith film that's coming out doesn't look like an Ang Lee film. To me, that should be celebrated. We're often talking about somebody's first record and how on their sophomore record, it doesn't remind them of their first record. It's a sophomore effort. And then when you get 10 years down the line, if they're doing the same thing, they're doing the same thing. But if they change up their sound, it's like, oh no, I like the first 2 albums best. I think we need to slow down and understand this film for what it was meant to be, or what you took from it outside of what you're expecting to take from it, because it's a Tarantino film. And he did exactly what I crave. He went the polar opposite of what he normally does. It is barely a Tarantino film. And to me, that should be celebrated. It should be celebrated that he can slow down and not be flashy. There's no chapters. There's no long-winded speeches with people's names, lampshade chair. I mean, listen to some of his characters' names are crazy great. There's none of that in this film. There's not these long monologues that are repeated 3 times throughout the film, like Hateful Eight, which I personally had a little bit of an issue with until they broke it up into the 4-part thing they did for Netflix. You know, when they broke it up into that 4-episode thing, for whatever reason, knowing I had it out in an hour and 15 minutes or however long that one episode was, knowing that that could be what I watched for the night, made it so much easier for me to focus on everything else in the film. And I ended up watching all 4 parts in one night, and it just made more sense to me this time, because it's not this long-winded speech after speech after speech, story after story after story, character development, layers upon layers, which is great. But sometimes it's like, okay, slow down. Do we really need to hear Samuel Jackson tell Bruce Dern the same story he just told Walter Goggins, the same story he just told Kurt Russell. Do we need that? My personal opinion was not really. And it kind of hurt Hateful Eight for me. This is the polar opposite. This is a celebration of Hollywood. It is him. He obviously has a love affection for that time frame, and it's beautiful looking. And those neon signs are those, there's neon signs that light up, and the texture of what Hollywood looked like, and the texture of what the ranch looked like, and the texture of what Leonardo DiCaprio's house looked like. It was fascinating to me. It was like, it's almost a documentary of what happened at that time. And then, spoiler alert for anybody who has not seen this film, I think you should see something like this on the big screen, regardless of what you feel about Tarantino, because it's a beautifully rich film. It's just gorgeous to look at. Then he does that thing where he changes history. And I was so satisfied by that. I just was like, I know the end of this story, or the end of the subplot story with Sharon Tate. I know what's going to happen. It's Hollywood history. But for it to not play out like that was almost like, oh, that's kind of sweet. That's kind of nice. That's kind of tender. And so, I mean, I pretty much said everything I'm going to say in the podcast in 5 minutes right there. But I keep hearing people talking about, and I've heard theater people talking about this, about how it was, you know, they showed Leonardo working as an actor over and over again. First of all, they don't. That's just an extended scene, and it seems to go on much longer than most people think it should. But to me, it was important to show all of that, because when he messes up and he has to go line, you see the gravity of what that does.
Oh, that's a great scene. There's amazing scenes in this movie, especially because you don't understand, like, we've already seen the set we've already seen the set. There's this, you know, we already have had the scene with him and the young girl who's also really, really good, and I'll have to pull up her name, but we've had the scene, we've seen the set, and then once we've seen Timothy Olyphant, they've met each other, so we kind of have the lay of the land, and then all of a sudden it just starts, but it starts in the show, and it's not shot on 16 millimeter, it's not shot like Bounty Law was, it's not shot in the same feel of like, oh, we're watching a show right now. So we're kind of like in the middle of this, and we're feeling like he kind of lulls you into expecting a whole scene to play out, and not seeing the crew, and not seeing any cables, and not seeing any lights and all that stuff, not seeing boom mics. And then all of a sudden he forgets his line. Right before he forgets his line, the like music of the score, which is the music of the show, drops out, and then he forgets his line, and it's like, it's such a perfect like editing trick. And then they reset the camera. I mean, like, that's so jarring. Like, cause we see that it kind of goes behind Timothy Olyphant. It's on a dolly track. It goes behind Timothy Olyphant, and it's kind of like on the over the shoulder shot of, you know, him. And then all of a sudden the audio drops out, and he's like, line. And then, you know, it's, and the director's like, no, just keep going. I mean, it's so well done. I love that scene. And then they reset the camera, which is weird. It's not, you shouldn't see that. It just makes you feel like, I don't know. I mean, that's part of what I do. You know, I've been on sets. I've been on, you know, news sets mainly, but seeing camera moves and critiquing them and then watching how it looks during the show, it's totally different. And so like, I'm hyper tuned to seeing things that don't fit or that aren't right. And that really just got to me. And I thought that was a really, really great scene to show how, you know, his incompetence and his lack of focus the night before, or the fact that he drank 8 whiskey sours. He's like, well, I could just stopped at 3 or 4, you know? It's like, he's to the point now where he can't do his job. And so I don't know. It was a great scene. I loved it. And then the scene in the trailer afterward is awesome too. I mean, Leonardo DiCaprio, we don't see him as a comedic actor too much, but Wolf of Wall Street, I mean, like, you get him in the hands of somebody who can use him. And I mean, Scorsese, Quentin Tarantino, like, he's hilarious. And he's an amazing actor, and he's definitely a chameleon, and he definitely puts in an amazing performance here. I thought he was great. Thought Brad Pitt was great, but I kind of expect Brad Pitt to be Brad Pitt. I expect him to be a better actor than he should be, than what you would expect out of like a hunky leading man guy. Like you just expect him to do Mr. and Mrs. Smith or, Troy and just like collect his paycheck and go home. But he's not that kind of an actor. He really does put in the work, and he's great too. He's got some really good scenes in this movie too. So,
that's been a curse of Brad Pitt his whole entire career. The fact that he is this good looking guy, and at 52, he's ridiculous. I was like, can we just put your shirt back on, please? Come on now. Like, can you have a little bit of a dad bod at 52? What is going on here?
Yeah, there were multiple, like both showings I was in, there were multiple times where like it was couples, like the woman would be like, hitting the guy next to her when he takes off his shirt. She's like, dang, and it's just like, yeah, I know, like, dude's got, he's fit, like he's definitely keeping it together, but I guess is he?
And it takes a lot to do that. It takes,
and
it might just
that
be
age,
just
I
him
would think
normally,
too.
and it's different. 52 is different nowadays, so, and we've learned a lot. He's probably always had to keep himself in semi good shape, and he might genetically be blessed, but still, I mean, he could let himself go. And back to the scene of Leonardo DiCaprio losing his line. I did not realize that was the scene that he was rehearsing the night before until I heard the actual lines in the scene. And then to actually hear the lines in such a believable way. And you, in the back of your mind, you're thinking, why does that sound familiar to me? Like you don't immediately click over. And it reminded me of the Tim Roth scene in Reservoir Dogs where he's memorizing the thing. So there are numerous times throughout this film that you see Tarantino reusing stuff that he's used throughout his whole entire career. And that's why I'm on this quest to stand up for this man and say, listen, he has done what he wanted to do in this film. And because you have an expectation of what, not you, Josh, just you, second person, people out there have this expectation of what they deserve from a Tarantino film. And it's like, it's all there. It's just told in a different way this time. It's not completely different. There are some thumbprints there, but there's no first act at the end and there's no third act at the beginning. There's no misdirection. There's no truck with the word on it in Kill Bill. And you don't know the reason why that's there until later on in the film. So for me, it was nice to see him kind of shift gears.
I did want to reference the actress that I talked about earlier, that young actress, Julia Butters. Yeah. And so what did you think about her performance? I'm not going to try to like take her down or anything like that, but she's having to thread a very thin, like she's having to thread a needle, a very small needle of being a young actress, but being a pretentious young actress, but not overplaying her pretentiousness. Like, I don't know. Like, I wouldn't even know how to start to instruct a kid on how to play that. It's, I don't know. But the only part of her performance that like gets me or that I'm still trying to process is at the end, like, after he throws her to the ground and then she comes up, it's even in the trailer, she comes up to him and whispers in, Rick's ear, it's like, that's the greatest acting I've ever seen. Like, I don't know if she actually believes that or if she just knows that he needs that as a fellow actor, and it would mean a lot to him if she said that, and so she would say that, because it doesn't seem like I don't know how genuine that was, but maybe that's just me, my, cynical brain trying to, because she seems fairly cynical. Like she's reading a biography on, I mean, it is Walt Disney, but still she's reading like this big, huge book, and he's reading a Western, whatever, a pulp Western. And she's like very like business oriented, but maybe she does maybe that's like the juice for her is performing and seeing other people perform and interacting with them, and she's like was truly impressed with him. I don't know.
What if she was a mathematician or a scientist or at a spelling bee and she was studying words or math problems or a scientific equation, and she knew more about it than the person sitting next to her who should know more about the equation? because it's a child, it comes across as pretentious. Because it's acting, it comes across even more pretentious. But what if she's just a person who believes in this craft and that this is what it takes to be the best that you can be? If she was a boxer or a athletic person or an Olympian, they have a larger than life personality because they have to believe they can be faster and stronger and do this kind of stuff and get up at 4:30 in the morning and stay there till 4:35 in the evening the next day. And they have to blood, sweat, and tears. And when they talk about doing all that stuff, because it's an athlete, there is less pretension about it because it seems to be harder to do something physical than it would be to do something artistic. Because we're talking about something elusive to everybody who's not necessarily involved in that craft, then it comes across as pretentious. And because it's a little girl, it comes across even more pretentious. I disagree with that. I don't think she comes across as pretentious. As a matter of fact, I loved what she said. Here's why I think she's a great actress. And everybody's been saying what a great performance she puts in. I'm not sure it's her or it's the words that she gets to say. The words are what is so important, especially to him, because she says, if it takes just that to make me that great, that much greater, then I'm willing to do that. If it means limiting something because it's going to help me propel myself to be better, and it's going to make it that much more believable, because that's what she's talking about. She's talking about being believable in the scene. And whatever it takes to be believable. And I have said that a million times. I am completely on the side of whatever it takes. As for the scene at the end where she says that's the greatest acting I've ever seen, I took it as face value. But here's why. Because it doesn't matter whether or not she's being facetious, sarcastic, pompous, pretentious, nothing. He believes that he could do that, and he did it. Yeah. He hit it, and he knows it. And I've been there. So when you come off and somebody goes, that was really great, you're not thinking they're telling you you were great. You're thinking, I knew I could do it. Like, you just know. So you don't care that, I mean, you care. It's great to hear great things. It's hard to hear bad things. But the reason why it's hard to hear bad things is because you know they're true too. Like, you know, something was missing. What were you thinking of? What was your motivation? What was your intention? Something was unfocused. You're right. It's not that I suck. It's that I was unfocused. And I know it. So you can't really take it personally. And the only reason why you get upset about it is because you know it's true. So I think that's what's going on in that scene for me. I was not overly impressed by her. I've seen her in other things actually, and I like her. And it's not her for me. It was the way the part was written and what she says. And I think if it was an older actor, it would be one of those situations where it's some older actor bestowing wisdom of the craft of acting on a younger actor, or somebody who takes it way more seriously and has won Oscars, and they're bestowing their magic onto somebody else. The fact that this young person knows this, and that's the goal, that she never mentions being famous, working again, getting her name out there, making money. She never says a word about any of that stuff. She's talking about the craft. So for me, I can't separate myself from how I feel about that versus what somebody who doesn't want to involve themselves in the craft like I want to. So I can't separate myself. So was her performance good? Yeah. I mean, she did what she got paid to do. Was it like this over the top greatness? I'm not sure, because I think it's about how it was written. So, you know, the bottom line is that it doesn't matter whether or not she was being genuine, although I personally think she was telling him that's some of the greatest acting she's ever seen, because he does go there, and you can see when he does it, you know, he's there, you know, because there's the moments like after the I love it. After he messes up the line And the director goes, use that. And he goes, yeah, I'm going to use it. I'm going to use it. I'm going to use it. And then he does that look like he's trying to use it. And, and he's not getting response from Timothy Olyphant, even though you can't see him in the shot. You could tell the other actor's going, what the hell are you doing, dude? And then he adjusts it to make it about the moment, not about what you think the moment should be. And then he lets it go. And that's where the scene takes off. And he knows it.
So let's talk about some of the other actors. I mean, it seems like there's a very small number of directors that can get actors as big as this in essentially bit parts. I mean, Timothy Olyphant does have a couple scenes, but he's got like Scoot McNairy in like barely one scene. I mean, he's got Clifton Collins Jr.'s in there. I mean, I think Tim Roth got cut. I think he was supposed to be one of the cowboys or something.
It says it in the credits.
Yeah, I've never seen that before.
It says Tim Roth cut.
Yeah, never seen that before.
I love it. But everybody's going to ask him. We're in the DVD world. It's going to be in the outtakes. Yeah. It's going to be in the extras.
Let's hope so. But yeah, I mean, yeah, you've got Scoot McNairy as like Businessman Bob or whatever. And yeah, I mean, it just a lot of these small parts, I'm just... I'm kind of amazed that he can just kind of call in. I'm assuming, calling in favors. Luke Perry in his last role. I mean, they obviously didn't know that was going to be the case, but he was fine. Damian Lewis is Steve McQueen. Like he's in like one scene really. He's in the Playboy Mansion scene, and we haven't talked about him yet. We kind of skipped over him, but Al Pacino in that first scene. I mean, that scene really reminded me of Glengarry Glen Ross, where we don't really know where this is going to go, but it reminded me of the scene where Al Pacino as Ricky Roma talks to Jonathan Pryce, and it starts off as just like, we're just two guys, we're just talking, like, and he in this movie was essentially buttering up Rick and telling him, oh, I watched your movies are great, all this stuff. But he did that for a purpose. And, he's kind of always honing in on those things, but he's doing it in such a jovial manner and like a cordial manner that when he kind of turns, it doesn't seem as like he's insulting Rick. He's insulting Leonardo DiCaprio's character, but it doesn't seem like an insult as much because he's like, yeah, it's his demeanor and how he's interacting. It's not necessarily like an insult. It's just kind of like saying like, man, you used to be this big, huge guy and now you're, the heel. Now you're the bad guy. Now you're the one who gets beat up every week. That can't feel good. And he's doing all that to, push him towards the spaghetti westerns, but it's done in such a masterful way. And, like you said earlier, that's in the writing. I mean, that's a very well written scene, and you just happen to have Al Pacino to say it. I don't know. I thought that was a really cool scene, and that was kind of a good scene to start on. But really, we start on something that has actually brought me around on this movie, which is the music. And I think that the music is inextricably linked to this film, much like some of his other movies, but just the kind of like mid-60s British, like this like jangly guitar, organ Brit pop music that was coming out back then with Paul Revere and the Raiders and all of those types of songs. They fit so well for the vibe that he's trying to create. And everybody in the cars driving with it, and I don't know if you've heard the soundtrack or heard about the soundtrack, but on the soundtrack, it not only has a lot of the songs that are in the movie, but it also has those ads, what is it? KHJ. It has those ads built in to the soundtrack instead of doing like it's kind of like the K-Billy Super Sounds of the 70s, but it's real. And those are real ads that aired in 1969, the tanning butter and the, mug root beer and all that stuff. So it's really cool to hear that interspersed. And it does kind of like, especially when I'm like driving to work, driving home from work, if I've got it on in the car, it does give you that feeling of like being in a different time. So I don't know. I thought that was a great way to start the movie and a great way to set up the characters, the kind of the relationship between Brad Pitt and Leonardo DiCaprio, and then also the kind of star power of Roman Polanski and Sharon Tate at the time. So I don't know. That was a great way to kick it off, and then that leads right into the Al Pacino scene. But that listening to that soundtrack has definitely like made me. It's kept this movie like in the forefront of my mind, and I've just in thinking back in the movie with the songs as a reference, I've picked up more from the movie after the fact. And I mean, that's the sign of a good movie right there.
Okay, so let's go backwards. I'm going to start with what you just talked about and then work backwards for a couple of things. So, what I think is brilliant about the fact that he does that with the soundtrack is that it's all there in the movie. You just have to pay. I'm not saying people aren't paying attention. Maybe people aren't as interested in those things as Tarantino is. And maybe because we have a separate vested interest in Hollywood than a lot of people who go to see movies, maybe they're not picking up on things. But did you see the Velveeta cheese thing in the corner and the type of macaroni and cheese that he makes?
It's Kraft macaroni and cheese, yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
And it looks like it's from 1969. All of those little nuances, like I was talking about with the neon lights and the cars and the way the streets looked, and just it looks cleaner, even though there's more smog back then. It's just there's so much texture to all of that stuff. And the fact that he uses a lot of those songs, but a lot of those songs are not, I don't think, the original people doing them. Some of them are new takes on the songs. Like the one song that you see, he's on the TV in this movie singing.
Oh yeah, Robert Goulet, MacArthur Park.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, see, I didn't know that. So is the Donna Summers version, is that a cover of the Robert Goulet's version?
Oh, I don't know. Some other guy
like,
wrote it. I don't know. I can't remember.
Because she turned it into a disco song, you know?
Yeah,
It was a huge disco song, which I always thought was really weird because I would be at the roller skating rink. Yes, at the roller skating rink. And I'd be like, are we talking about a cake that is melting in the rain? What is this song? You know, and I'm from the 70s. I'm the 70s baby. So like to actually put that into my mind's eyes, weird is in retrospect or in perspective of the songs from the 70s, it's not that weird, but it is kind of weird. Anyway, the point to all that is that it layers it and gives you texture. So I think we should be focused on, he was setting up such a descriptive time frame that maybe that's why it's not overly dialogued like traditional Tarantino films, if that's what you want to call it. Okay, so back to the casting of all of these people in these small minor parts. I'm not sure Tarantino's calling in favors. I think people are like, I'll work with Tarantino even if I don't have to say anything. Thank you, Amber Tamblyn from Django Unchained. She is in that movie, and she's in, I think, 2 small scenes, and one of them's in a window and she's overlooking something and she never says a word. And she was a huge star at the time. So a lot of those actors who were in the bar during the shooting of the TV show, those are working actors that I recognize as having all these parts in all these movies I've seen over the years. They don't say a word. I think it's because it's Tarantino. Why would you not want to come in and sit for a day, 3 days, watch this man work, watch Leonardo DiCaprio work, shut up, get your $80 and go home. And then you get to say you're in a Tarantino movie. And I love how Tarantino continuously utilizes people that we're not expecting him to use. Jonah Hill in Django Unchained, again, he's got 1 or 2 lines in that movie and you barely know it's him until, of course, when you do know it's him. Then Don Johnson is in that movie. He's barely used, but he's in there and he has a good scene with Samuel Jackson. No, not Samuel Jackson. I'm sorry. I'm thinking of Leonardo DiCaprio in that. Christoph Waltz and Jamie Foxx. And it's a great little scene, but he doesn't do much more than that. And it's Don Johnson. You know, why not? You know, go all the way back to Pulp Fiction and revitalizing John Travolta's career, if you will. And it's exactly what it did. So I think people, admire this man as a film craftsman, so they want to be involved in his films. I think that's why you have Damian Lewis playing a very small part, but a significant part, because what he's doing is he's telling you what you should know about this subplot if you don't already know about the subplot with Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski.
I didn't know about the Jay Sebring guy. I mean,
yeah, I didn't. There would be no reason for me to know about that story unless I was like reading a history of that time frame in Hollywood in that situation. I wouldn't know anything about it. I take it he's one of the people who was there
murdered. And, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess maybe I've heard his name, but the point to Damian Lewis being there is to let you know what's going on in that subplot. And, you know, Damian Lewis is no slacker. He's got a couple Emmys. He's got, you know, a great TV show underneath his belt. He's got another great TV show that he's working on right now. So I think these people admire this director and want to work with him.
Yeah. Well, I'm just going to kind of start going down the list as far as like the performances. Margaret Qualley, I think it's Qualley. She's in one of my favorite movies of the last like 5 years. And she comes from like a dancing background, but she was in The Nice Guys. She was Amelia in The Nice Guys, and she's great in that movie. But seeing her in this movie, like, she looked a lot thinner. Like, I kind of started to get worried about her. Like, she looks like unhealthy or something. I don't know. Like really thin. Now maybe she's supposed to look thin because she's a Manson girl, and they don't have a lot of. I mean, they're literally digging food out of the trash. So I mean, maybe that's like a method thing for her, but. I don't know. I was like, dang. But she's really good in her interactions with Brad Pitt, which is essentially like her character. She's the one who, you know, tries to bring him into the fold of the Manson family, or at least, you know, because she says multiple times, she's like, "Oh, Charlie's gonna love you," but, you know, but she's our entry into the Spahn Ranch and all that stuff. So that, I mean, it works well, and her kind of like sheepish, you know, grin and all of that, and figuring if she could play the Brad Pitt character Cliff or not, and he's a little bit too wise for her for whatever she wants to do. So, but yeah, I thought that was a good. She did a great job in there. And what about Dakota Fanning? Like, I didn't even realize that was Dakota Fanning, but I didn't see I know people are like, oh my gosh, she's amazing, but I don't know. I didn't see what was amazing about the performance. It seemed like a perfectly good performance, but what did you think?
First of all, what was the young actress's name? Margaret Qualley. Okay. I never realized she's the daughter in The Leftovers. I just put that together.
Yeah.
And she's fantastic in that. And I love when I rediscover like my love for somebody's performance by going, I had no idea that was her. I had no idea that was her. But I think maybe she might be as thin as she is because she just did
Fosse Verdon.
Yes, and she's nominated for the Emmy for that. And they're talking about how these performances have kind of not snuck in, but are being recognized that might not have been recognized in the past, and that she stood out so hardcore that she's being nominated. She got nominated. So watch out for her for the Emmys. And, you know, dancers have really thin bodies anyway. So that could be why she's in that kind of shape. It's kind of like Natalie Portman looking so thin in Black Swan. So Dakota Fanning, here's what she did that I think is so great. She's unrecognizable. Like, I had to keep saying to myself, is that Dakota Fanning? Yeah, I think I've heard she's in this film. You don't recognize her when she's just talking, and you don't see her in the beginning of that scene. You know, tell me when he's closer. You don't know that's her. It doesn't sound like her. And when she comes to the door, it barely looks like her. And she's only recognizable in that one shot when he's walking into the house and she's in the recliner and she's kind of back in the recliner. You can kind of see it's her, but she's really unrecognizable. And I think it's she's growing up, and, you know, she's much older than what we're normally used to seeing her, because she was a younger actress, and she's kind of left and then come back. She's always worked, but you know, nothing where it goes, oh, there's Dakota Fanning. But there's nothing recognizable about anything that she does and says, and her actions and her body language. So I get why people are going, wow, that was really great. Because if she was a friend of mine, I'm not sure I would know that was her until that one last shot where she's in the recliner. So I see it. Because you can't tell also, is she lying about that guy in the
Oh,
bed?
that's the best part. Yeah.
Yeah. But that's a skilled actress could only pull that off. Like
Yeah.
an actress who has less of an ability might give it away, or might sound completely like the guy doesn't exist, or that he does exist. You don't know. You don't know. And she goes toe to toe for Brad Pitt and shuts him down a couple of times where he has to go, no, I'm coming in. And she was like, no, you're not.
Yeah.
And it's a toe to toe scene. And she kind of wins that scene until he decides to, there's a moment when he physically can come in, whether or not she's going to stop him or not. He physically can make it through that door. And until that moment, as an audience member, you're thinking he's not coming in because she's not letting him in. So she trumps him every single moment. She scores every single time. He bats it back to her and she just slam dunks it right back to him every time. So I get why people are applauding her for this performance. And I actually think it's going to get her even more work because people are so, oh yeah, Elle, we've been paying attention to your sister. Dakota's back. Hey, what's up? We know you. Welcome.
Yeah. But the other cool part for me about that scene was that there's no real score in this movie, but that is a scene in which a score would be welcomed. And what Tarantino did, instead of kind of like break his rule that he had created, I don't know if it was an official rule or not, to not have a score for the movie, he used she was changing channels and he used like music like the score from a TV show. I don't know, it's Mannix or I don't know what it was, but I used a score from a TV show, kind of like a suspenseful portion of the score from the TV show, which, by the way, TV shows back then would go a long time without anybody talking. And I don't know why, but maybe, I don't know. I have a couple of theories, but I may not necessarily go through all those right now. But I notice it a lot because at work, we have multiple TV channels, like we have MeTV, Cozy TV, that we're responsible for, that we actually, put out. And then I will sometimes need to double check the closed captioning, for example. And so I will turn it to that channel, and I will stand there for what seems like minutes to wait for somebody to say something so that I can see the closed captioning show up on the screen. And it's amazing how long, like whether it's like Dragnet or, like The Rifleman or any of these shows that are on, I'm amazed at how long it takes, and how maybe it's that recording dialogue was so difficult back then, or, overdubbing was difficult. So like, if we could get away with not saying anything, let's just do that, because that's so much easier. So I don't know, but I'm not actually that amazed that he was able to find a segment of a TV show where there was that much music all in a row with nobody talking, because it worked out perfectly for that particular scene as he's walking back towards Bruce Dern's room.
I think it has a lot to do with the fact that maybe TV, although it had been around for a decade and a half at that point, maybe a little bit longer, relied on storytelling through visuals, not necessarily through dialogue. And really, back in the 70s, early 80s, and even the early 90s, there was a separation between feature films and TV. And when actors would do TV, their careers were washed up, or they were has-beens and stuff like that. And then people like Holly Hunter and Glenn Close were like, screw that, I'm doing this story because it's really cool. When she did Roe v. Wade, and Glenn Close did the story about the military person who was outed and then kicked out because she was a lesbian. They all won Emmys and all these awards and all that other stuff. And then it started to change. I'm not saying because those two women chose those roles, but it did start to change later on, and then became HBO. And then it became a dialogue driven medium. Before then, maybe we just didn't need it because we're so used to, it's not a radio play. It's not a theater piece. It's not relying on people describing what's happening in the narrative. This car chase describes what happens in the narrative. This person putting their hand out the window and throwing the trash, usually drugs if it was Dragnet, or what they would say was drugs, or gun, or whatever it is, that tells that part of the story. You don't need somebody to go, hey, that person just threw a gun out the window, we got to stop and get it. The visual is what's telling the story. So I think it's a little bit of a combination of both. It probably was difficult for dialogue, and it's probably to loop it and all that other stuff that they do, whatever you call it. But I also think it's a visual thing. So, but to actually use that TV as the soundtrack, see, I think that's great, because does he ever do that in any of his other films? And I think those are the small little things that people are not giving him credit for with this film. And I think that's because they're waiting for the big hip hop song to break out like it does in Django and Unchained, or, bang, bang, we shot him down, bang, bang, from Pulp Fiction or wherever that song's
Kill
from.
Bill.
Kill Bill. Thank you. They're not there. So he utilizes his love for soundtracks and TV shows in a different way than he has ever before. And I think people didn't notice it, and they didn't pick up on it. I immediately went, is that the TV still playing? Like, that's brilliant.
Yeah. That's cool.
It's the TV still playing, and then it picks up when he comes back out. It's just really well done. So I do want to make a side note really quick to go back just for a split second about actors that he puts to work that you might not see in a big mainstream film, if you will. With Luke Perry, that man has been working nonstop since Beverly Hills 90210. He did Oz. He's done a whole bunch of things. He was on Riverdale recently, Riverdale, and he's worked. But because of being on 90210, people have an image of him, and it would have been nice to see how this might have broken up what people thought of him. But because this is his last film, there's going to be like this respect to him that he might not have gotten unless he got a part in a Tarantino film and then lived. There's going to be a respect that this was his last film. It almost seems right to me that this working actor who just happened to become popular in a TV show, and he's good, continues to have a reputation of being better than what people were expecting him to be. And this being his last credit is going to do that for him. So I think it's great to cast somebody like Luke Perry. I see why Tarantino does it, because Tarantino, for me, doesn't see the image of Barbarino from Welcome Back, Kotter. He sees the talent behind what John Travolta has done with an Oscar nomination under his belt and all of these movies under his belt, and lived a career, for better, for worse, up to this point. He sees that talent and utilizes it. So it's nice that this is Luke Perry's last film. Unfortunately it is, but it to me, I think it is an ode to him as a working actor.
Well, we haven't talked about Sharon Tate yet, and Margot Robbie's portrayal of her. For me, I think that it seems like the whole point of, like, the whole Sharon Tate plot or subplot, or it's not even a secondary plot, it's like a co-plot, is to kind of like show specifically Sharon Tate, not necessarily Roman Polanski, but Sharon Tate specifically, her life, a little bit of like slice of her life, but then also what she did as an actress, and then by extension, by changing the timeline, by changing what actually happened in real life, showing what kind of potential she could have had going forward as an actress, as a mother, as a wife, all that. And so I think that's kind of like the point. I mean, and also the fact that the Manson murders in 1969 were kind of like the end of an era. And I don't know specifically about in Hollywood and in Los Angeles how much of an end of an era is. I think that's pretty much like the marking point of like the end of the free love era, the end of the kind of like, not necessarily the end of hippie movement, but the end of the, touchy-feely, everybody does their own thing. There's all love and no hate, all that stuff. It was kind of the end of that. And a changing of the guard in Hollywood. Also, they didn't spend a lot of time talking about that, but the Rick Dalton character is the the old guard, and the Cliff character is an old stuntman, the old guard stuntman, and he's put up against, or he goes against Bruce Lee, who's a more polished. He calls him a dancer, because I guess Bruce Lee he won Hong Kong. I don't know. He won dance competitions. But anyway, so there's the juxtaposition of new versus old in the stuntmen, new versus old in the acting, and then also how Sharon Tate's life would have progressed afterwards. So that's what I got out of it, as far as like specifically Charles Manson and all that. I mean, obviously Manson wasn't a big part of the film himself because he was in one scene, but I think that's what I think that Tarantino was going for with showing Sharon Tate as much as he did and in the ways that he did, because it was pretty much like a love letter to Sharon Tate. This whole, like, her whole co-plot is, I mean, it's just a love letter. There was not much character development. There was not any character development for her character.
Well, I think first of all, for me, the Bruce Lee comment, I thought he was talking about how he's not technically a real fighter. He's choreographed as a fighter in film and TV.
Mm-hmm.
You're choreographed like a dancer. I didn't know that Bruce Lee won dance contests. So, I mean, it might be on the nose, but I also thought it was kind of like a snub to the fact that, this guy has come into Hollywood and thinks he's all this, and he's bragging and he's talking and he's all this. And he is an accomplished person by this point in his career, Bruce Lee. But to somebody like Brad Pitt, he's seen these guys come and go, might not necessarily be a martial arts expert, but he's seen these people who've got these puffed out chests, and that's why that moment about it's called manslaughter. You put your hands on anybody, you go to jail. It's called manslaughter. It's so brilliant, and the way he delivers stuff is so brilliant that you hear it in a different way because of the way Brad Pitt does it. So I thought it was that. I thought he was talking about him being choreographed as a fighter. As for the Sharon Tate stuff, I think you're exactly right. I think it is a love letter, but I also think it's a love letter to an actor who loves being an actor in movies, and the joy and the satisfaction that she gets posing by her own photograph without feeling cheesy at all, by doing a little Charlie's Angels pose, if you will. And then going in and being so comfortable watching herself on film. And I love the fact that they use the real Sharon Tate in the movie that she's watching, which is great. And then you see it juxtaposed with her practicing it. Margot Robbie as Sharon Tate. I loved that.
Yeah.
And Tarantino has said, yes, he wanted it to always be Sharon Tate because he wanted to make sure people understood that she was something to respect, and that she did have a love for this, and that there should be a love for her as an actress. And maybe it's gone forgotten, or maybe it needs to be reminded every now and then, that eventually this person probably would have taken it to the next level, being Oscar nominations, whatever it may be. So when you watch her watching herself, the joy that she has reminds me of how much joy I have watching a movie. And to actually be proud of yourself that somebody's laughing because what you did was funny. And there's so much heart and soul and texture to her performance that I don't need dialogue. I don't need a character study. I don't need a backstory. I don't need to know she's from wherever. I don't need to know that she has 5 brothers. I don't need to know that her father abused her. I don't need to know any of that stuff in the character development, because what he did was placed her as the heart of this movie. And the heart reminds you that this industry, this craft, is something to love and to feel joy when you're watching it, regardless of what you're watching. And it's obviously a love letter to Hollywood, this whole film. And it's obviously a love letter to her. But Margot Robbie just stands back and just exudes this light, and just, she beams with this power, and I don't know what it is about her. You know, she's beautiful. She's a beautiful woman. So maybe that has something to do with it, but that seems so superficial to even say. I think it's her spirit, her soul, Margot Robbie.
Yeah.
And then I think what Tarantino wanted to see was how Sharon Tate also illuminated that soul and just let that light out. You know, because there's been that criticism that, you know, she's a major Hollywood star. She has an Oscar nomination. She's been in critically acclaimed movies. Margot Robbie can act. Why does she not say anything in your movie? And there was a reporter who tried to like turn it into something that I didn't see it on the screen as sort of like a misogynistic thing to hold back the female lead, blah, blah, blah. That's conjecture based on what I remember hearing. That's not exactly what the reporter said. But, you know, Tarantino shut the reporter down by saying, I reject your hypothesis. And that's all he said about it.
Yeah.
And she said, to not be able to say something in a movie is as hard as saying something in a movie. So to have more dialogue doesn't mean that I would have done my job better. Also, not verbatim, not exactly what Margot Robbie says. It's what I heard her say. So for me, I don't need any of that stuff. We got what we needed from the Sharon Tate co-plot, subplot. The only thing I would say about that, and it has nothing to do with the way it's written, the way it's played, the way it's directed, is that it does have an ounce of it's wedged in there feeling to connect this story of Rick Dalton to the story of Charles Manson, and Sharon Tate. It's kind of wedged in there. Now, granted, it's wedged really well because they live next door to each other. Roman Polanski just did Rosemary's Baby, which I just rewatched again, not even realizing I was rewatching it after I'd seen Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Yeah, it's a great movie.
It is a good movie.
And it's just the definition of creepy, man. There's just it's unnatural.
It's so much more scary than, you know, Child's Play or Nightmare on Elm Street or Friday the 13th. Like, it's just a different level. Like, it's up there.
I would prefer to fight Chucky and his knives over having any fever dream in any Polanski film, especially Rosemary's Baby. I'll take the fight against Freddy and the fight against Jason over those fever dreams any day of the week because they're traumatizing. So yes, they're next door neighbors, and this is old Hollywood, and this is new Hollywood, and this is where it's going, and it's the end of an era and end of a decade, literally. So I understand how he could have connected them, and he did it. He did a fine job of it. But it just, if you were to take her subplot out, it would have mattered not to Rick Dalton's story really at all. Rick Dalton and Cliff Booth's story at all. It really wouldn't have made a difference. The fact that they connected it and revised history and did that great last sequence is what makes it worth all of the wedging you could possibly do to put it in there. And to me, it's okay, and I justify it and I let it go and I don't think about it to a degree because it's such a passionate performance by Margot Robbie that it's worthy of being in there just for that, just to show us that there are people who are in this big industry that you hear horrible things about other people about, who actually genuinely loved it and was living a great life at the time. And everything was exploding for those two people at the time, Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski, and continued for Roman Polanski for a while. And I love the fact that Tarantino has a way of making a statement without really realizing that you're making a statement, because he does it in reverse. When Damian Lewis is talking at the party and says, look at that guy and look at that guy. She's definitely got a type, you know, short guys who look like 12-year-olds. Well, that's not a statement about Sharon Tate. That's not a statement about Sharon Tate. At least I didn't take it as. I thought he's making a statement about Roman Polanski's history. That's what he's saying. Because how do you put Roman Polanski in a movie, even though it takes place way before the controversy? It's not a controversy.
No.
It's a criminal activity.
Yeah,
so I don't want to downplay
prosecuted and found guilty.
Yes. Yeah, I don't want to downplay that at all. But he made a statement about that without having to make a statement about that.
No, I don't know what you mean. Like, but Damian Lewis's Steve McQueen was saying she is attracted to men that look like 12-year-old boys. But what does that have to do with Roman Polanski?
Because he's a man who's attracted to 12-year-old looking girls and 12-year-old girls.
But that would mean that he would think that Sharon Tate looked like she was 12 years old. That would mean that Roman Polanski would look like Sharon.
No. That's too literal. I'm saying that that's Tarantino's way of letting the audience know that he knows of Roman Polanski's history without really saying it. Well, that's future history.
Yeah, sure.
But it reminded me of that when they made that statement. So
interesting. Okay, so that's what you took from it. Yeah, I guess I didn't really get that part. He really stayed away from Roman Polanski, and other than reverence for him as a filmmaker, he stayed away from. I mean, Roman Polanski was just like gone most of the time, and she was, and
well,
which
he was
totally could have. Yeah, I'm sure maybe he was shooting a movie at the time or something. I don't know, but
no, he was out of town when that happened.
Well, I knew he was out of town. He
was supposed to,
but the movie happens over 6 months. Like there's 6 months and then 6 months later, because he goes to Italy. Rick goes to Italy during before that happens. So there's a 6-month period,
right.
And she obviously gets super pregnant during that time too. But anyway, what about the weird situation with having Kurt Russell be a stunt coordinator and also having Kurt Russell be the narrator? Why would he do that? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't jive with his previous movies where you have like an interstitial narrator. Like in Inglourious Basterds, you've got Samuel L. Jackson he kind of comes in for the Hugo Stiglitz, little like, here, I'm going to tell you about Hugo Stiglitz and this is what he did. And he was the narrator for that. Yeah, you've got, there's voiceovers in Kill Bill. Was there one in, I don't know if there was a narrator in Hateful Eight.
Yes, there is. There's totally a narrator in Hateful Eight. Yes, there is. It's one of my least favorite things about that movie.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think it's
Okay. Quentin Tarantino is the narrator
in Hateful Eight.
That's what IMDb says. But
interesting.
I'll have to take a look at that. And he's not in the movie, so there you go. But either way, it's an odd choice to have one of the characters, kind of like a side character, supporting character, be the narrator, be the omniscient narrator. So I don't know. That didn't really jive with me. So that was another kind of like weird. Like why not get Samuel L. Jackson? Why not get James Earl Jones? Why not get, I don't know, Annie Potts? I don't care. Just like get somebody who's not in the movie to be the narrator and let's move on. It's like, logically, it doesn't make sense.
Well, it didn't make sense for me because I don't think you need it, because he's done so many things in this film that are not what he traditionally does. And the narrator is the narrator like in the first hour of the film? It seems like the narrator just shows up much later on in the film that I either didn't.
Yeah, it's later on in the film. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't think it's a necessity. There's no reason for it other than that is what Tarantino does. So for me, it didn't bother me that it was Kurt Russell. It didn't bother me that he was a character in the movie. What bothered me is that he's done so many things up to this point that are so not his style or not his Tarantino-esque, that why all of a sudden drop a narrator in when it's not a necessity in the movie, and it's not a necessity because it's a necessity in all his other films. So that's the only reason why it bothered me. And I can't tell you one thing that narrator told us that we didn't already know. I don't really remember what he said.
Well, and one example of why a narrator's not necessary is that there's one of the scenes with Kurt Russell in it where he goes into Rick's trailer and he's like, hey, I don't like the guy. I don't like his vibe. And then there's like, well, why don't you like his vibe? It's Brad Pitt. He's awesome. He's great. But then it's like, he killed his wife. And then they cut to the scene. Look, this is already a flashback. So we're like a flashback within a flashback. But they cut to the scene where he's like on the boat with his wife with the harpoon, which is hilarious. So well done. And there's no narrator necessary. It's just like a, quick flashback within your flashback. And then you know why. And so then, you come out of that Bruce Lee flashback too. Did you notice that Bruce Lee scene, the fight scene, was mostly one shot? When we first see Bruce Lee and he's talking, you kind of hear his voiceover, and then it shows him in that backlot area, and that is a single scene from him talking, doing his whole monologue thing, to his interaction with Cliff, to Cliff and him fighting the initial, like, you know, 2 first knockdowns, Bruce Lee knocking down Cliff and Cliff knocking down Bruce Lee. That's all one shot, and it's probably 2.5 minutes long, 3 minutes long. I mean, it's really cool, and there's a lot of camera motion. It's really well done. It's a really cool scene. And then obviously there's some cuts after that, like him throwing Bruce Lee into the car, all that stuff. There's some cuts in there, but yeah, it's really well done. I was impressed with that. And there's little flourishes like that throughout this movie that I think are great. Even the, you know, Cliff scene, how Tarantino shows Cliff going home to his trailer and feeding his dog, which we haven't talked about the dog yet, who's awesome. And Steph really liked the dog, of course. So yeah, she was excited about that. But yeah, how he interacts with his dog, you know, making his food, making the dog food, having the strict rules with the dog, all of that is really well done. His interaction with the dog and just their interplay is really cool. Also, did you notice, I didn't notice it the first time, but the second time I noticed this movie has a lot more Tarantino universe products in it. It, of course, has Red Apple cigarettes. Did you stay to the end for the Red Apple ad? Did you see that?
No.
So yeah, if you just like bolted out of the theater, they do a little bit of the thing, and then they cut to a Red Apple ad, like a Bounty Law 1950s black and white Red Apple ad, which is pretty funny. Him, you know, being like Red Apple, you know, it's like, and it doesn't burn as much. Like he has these weird, like, you know, it's like, we're known for our cigarettes not burning a lot. And it's like in your throat. I'm like, oh great, this is. Ugh. But anyway, so there's the Red Apple stuff, but then also like the beer that he drinks is fake beer. It's Old Chattanooga. So, and of course he was born in Memphis, Tennessee, and he grew up, or no, Knoxville. He was born in Knoxville, which is close to Chattanooga. And he kind of sort of grew up there for a little while, but mainly lived out in LA. But I thought that was really cool. That's the first time I've seen Old Chattanooga beer, but maybe there's a precedent for that. Maybe that was used in another movie. But, and then the other one I thought was really cool was the dog food, which I definitely noticed the second time. I noticed the first time that the dog food, wolf's tooth dog food. And so it's got a picture of a wolf on there. But then if you look underneath, it says there's different flavors. And so there's rat flavor and raccoon flavor. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. This is awesome.
Yeah, I saw it the first time. I thought it said made with rat.
Oh, yeah.
Or made with rat or something. And then I quickly noticed that it was rat flavored, or something else made me notice something else was flavored.
I thought that was so cool. Oh man, I love that. So yeah, that was a lot of fun. But I like that little scene. And actually that I've been listening to a bunch of podcasts with Quentin Tarantino on them. There's only a few, but I've listened to all of them, I think. But he talked about how that scene with him driving into the drive-in, like, or because he lives behind the drive-in, but him driving into where the drive-in was, that's actually a miniature. The drive-in movie theater, the whole thing, that dolly or the crane shot going up and over the drive-in screen and seeing all the cars, the screen and all the cars and the little projector thing, that's all a miniature, like whatever 1/24th scale miniature or something. So it's, I mean, they spent a lot of time and energy on this kind of stuff. I mean, obviously it's all shot on film. I mean, they're really doing it. Like, they're making movies in the traditional way. There's only a handful of people doing that nowadays. Christopher Nolan, Quentin Tarantino. I mean, there's a handful of people doing it, but not that many. J.J. Abrams still does it. So it'll be interesting. Rian Johnson, I think he's still, actually, I don't know if his newest movie, Knives Out, was shot. I think that might have been shot on digital, but still, there's definitely still a craft to this, and they're keeping it alive.
Well, that's probably because he comes from a different age of Hollywood and a different, that's not what is part of his upbringing. You know, miniature models are part of his upbringing when it comes to making films. So I don't know what people are going to do 25 years from now, digitally recreate digital. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, why not do that? It's a really great shot. And I didn't know it was a miniature, but I did know that something wasn't, I knew that place didn't exist. But at the same time, there's something so real about it that I thought, did they actually build that and put all those cars in there just for that one shot? And I thought to myself, you know, people in Tarantino films always live in the crazy cool places. You know, they always got like really cool entrances to their houses, or somebody lives out in the desert, like Michael Madsen does in, yeah, Kill Bill, who's in this one too. And then when he pulls around, I thought, is he going to the movies? Oh, they're going to show this guy has a love for movies too. And then he pulls around and I was like, oh no, he lives on the other side of of course he does. I was like, of course he does. I was like, that makes perfect sense. And the dog is great. But what's so great about the dog is how it's utilized, how the dog is utilized. Mm-hmm. That scene, we know when he goes home is great. And you think, well, that was a really great scene with the dog. And that dog has personality coming out of its everywhere. And it's going to be one of those movie pets that everybody talks about, how great of a dog it is. But really, that dog is the dog. I mean, like, it is the dog of dogs at the end of the movie. It's that whole discipline they have together has a benefit and has a reason to support the narrative. And so that's why I really fell in love with the dog. Because if it was just that one scene, I would have been like, okay, that's cool. He's, you know, one of those people who really doesn't attach himself to people. Brad Pitt's character doesn't attach, you know, he's got a dog, blah, blah, blah. He lives alone. Yeah. Heath Ledger, Brokeback Mountain, one more reference. But then the dog really comes into play at the end.
It's one of those Chekhov's guns. You know, there's a bunch of them in this movie.
Yeah.
You know, that the dog's one of them. The acid cigarette's one of them. I mean, they're kind of like littered.
The dog food can.
The dog food cans.
Yeah. I mean, it's not just a neat little thing. It becomes a purposeful thing at the end of the film.
Yeah. So all of that, the flamethrower in the, you know... Well, it's like, you know, you kind of think like, why are they spending so much time? Like, why did they recreate a whole like Nazi movie set just to show it at the very beginning of the movie when they're talking about it? And it's like, well, there's a reason, and it's being used, you know. So they're just he's laying breadcrumbs throughout the whole film, you know, to for all of it to come to a head at the end, and you know, and it works out.
I want to get to the last sequence that we're just, you know, beginning to talk about now. I think it is literally the best last sequence of any Tarantino film to date. And a lot of people are going to have a problem with that, but it's short, it's concise, it gets to the point, it's violent, it's done, it's over with, and you get it all. It's not a long, drawn-out thing. Not that that's a bad thing, like in Django Unchained. That's brilliant. I think that whole bloody battle fight, if you will, gunfight, is cinematic opera. And that gore is actually borderline beautiful because it's so disgusting, if you will. I know that doesn't make much sense, but that's how I feel about it. And, you know, you got the whole last scene in Pulp Fiction, and you got the last scene in Hateful Eight, and they're all building up to that. And I kind of forgot about that to a degree in this film, because this film has a different tone and attitude a lot of the times that his other films have. And so I kind of forgot. And then I thought, I'm wondering how he's going to shift gears all of a sudden, because it's coming up on that night when you see the car coming up and it's making all the noise. And Leonardo DiCaprio goes out there and does that brilliant job of just bashing on them hippies
with the jug of margaritas in his hand.
Oh my God, it's so great. He's so great. His choices are just beyond. I don't know if they come to him, if he thinks about them on the spot, if he rehearses them. I don't know what he does, but he makes such great choices as an actor. And I thought, well, then that's the connection to this group coming to go to Roman Polanski's house. And then when he goes, go around, one of the hippies goes, Tex goes, go around to see if there's a back entrance. You're like, why is she going behind Leonardo DiCaprio's house? But I thought, well, maybe they're going to go up the back of Polanski's house, and that's how they're going to get in. And,
well, they didn't realize that Sharon Tate and I don't think they knew who Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski were. They didn't. They just said, because Manson said, go to this house, because they thought that he thought that his previous manager or something lived there. But when he showed up, the only time he's in the movie, when he showed up and saw that there was like, he may have known that was Sharon Tate, a famous actress, but at the very least he knew that was like a rich person who looked really good and was probably a famous actress, and that was good enough.
That's why it's kind of brilliant what Tarantino does, because it doesn't matter that in his film, it doesn't matter that that's Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski's house. They're just going to commit a murder in this high society place. And they talk about that.
But they make a choice. They're like, we don't know who these other people are in this other gate thing, whatever that is, but we do know who Rick Dalton is. And we're
right.
definitely going to make a statement by killing Rick Dalton.
And then it just takes off. And that whole sequence I could watch over and over and over and over again. I would venture to say after Hateful Eight that I didn't have an immediate desire to see it again. I remember that. And I thought to myself, I will eventually see this film again, because I've seen all of his movies a couple of times at this point, I believe. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Do I have a desire to see Hateful Eight again? And I'm not so sure that people are going to come out of Once Upon a Time and say they have a desire to see it again. But because of that last sequence, you have to see it again, because I want to see that again, not because of the violence, of course, but there's a poetry and there's it's orchestrated in such a way that it looks like music. It feels like it has this own movement to it. It seems like a ballet. I know that's weird to say about something so violent, but it's so well crafted and so well orchestrated that it has this dance feel to it, and it seems like art. And I know that's weird because it's violent as hell. Comparatively speaking, not half as violent as other films.
Yeah.
But there's a poetry to how he deals with gore and violence. And there's also this weird satisfaction, not that those people get what they are due, but the fact that all of that stuff that you've been watching up to this point all have a payoff. Like we just talked about, the dog food can, the dog, all of that stuff. Brad Pitt being able to literally fight, and it's just extremely well done. How long would you say that sequence is?
I think it's fairly short, because one reason why is because of the musical choice that they use in there. The whole fight fits within the Vanilla Fudge version of "You Keep Me Hanging On," which is like a Supreme song. So you take this kind of like Motown Supreme song, and you just like slow it down and you weight it down, and it's like a slog. Like it just seems like it's like an ominous slog version of a Supreme song. And I think you get that feeling. And also he's on acid. So like, I'm sure he's feeling, Brad Pitt's character's feeling, well, he's obviously feeling slow and just, it's gotta be like a weird setup for him. And you get that feeling. I think the music is a huge part of that, but at the same time, like that's, I think the feeling that I got, it seemed like it was long, but I don't think it was that long.
I guess I'm kind of timing it from the whole sequence outside.
Oh, they pull
with,
up?
Leonardo DiCaprio. Yeah, when they
that's
pull up. I
15
guess I'm thinking about
top to bottom.
Yeah, the last 15, 20 minutes of the film. I don't know. There's just something about it. I don't know. It lit me up. I thought it was really well done.
Well, I've got a question for you then. So do you get a satisfaction out of seeing the Manson family killers being just decimated by Brad Pitt and his dog because of what they did to Sharon Tate and the other people in her house in real life? Or Or is it a different thing?
I think it's a different thing because I don't want to ever say I get a satisfaction out of somebody getting their face pummeled in by a dog food can because it's disgusting.
Dang.
And no human being really should have to do that, or have to go through that. But I mean, they did break in. He is defending himself. Sure. So no, it's not a satisfaction of that. It's a satisfaction that this is the last 20 minutes of the third act, and it's all coming together and it's all going to make sense. And of course, the piece de resistance is when he goes, I don't know why I think it's funny when he goes and gets the blowtorch and you're like, yes, that makes perfect sense. We know that Tarantino hates Nazis and he loves to kill Nazis. We know that. But why did they put that Nazi sequence in the beginning? Yes, he's a film star and this was probably one of his movies. And, there's all the talk about the snuff film in Tarantino's Inglourious Bastards and how the tower scene, you know what I'm talking about.
Nation's Pride.
There's a lot of talk about how that was very gratuitous, and that was not necessary, and so forth and so on. I don't necessarily agree with that, but
that's so, based on real movies that were made by the Nazis. So it's supposed to be in there, and it should be in there. Yes.
Well, thank you for definitively telling me exactly how I feel, but I don't mean to sound sarcastic. I'm actually saying thank you because sometimes I skirt around it because I don't want to offend people, but you're exactly right. So that said, thank you for saying that clearly. I agree with you 100%. So you're wondering what you forget about it after 2 hours and 40 minutes. You completely forget about it. And then he comes out with it. And you're like, no, this is not happening. And then it does happen. And then on top of it, okay, so that's the ice cream and the Jimmy's and the whipped cream. Where's the cherry? Where's the cherry? Then he has to tell somebody later on that, oh, well, yeah, I had to use a blowtorch on him because, and then he does it. He does that thing that actors do where it's not necessarily about this traumatic thing that he had to defend himself with this blowtorch that still works. It's because, that's from that movie. Oh, you saw that movie? Oh, yeah. It still works. Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm glad you saw that movie. It's about the actor and his work, not about this traumatizing thing that just happened in this pool. So then not only do you get a cherry, but then you get like an extra scoop of ice cream on top of it, because that is so what this film was about for me. It was an exploration about how people are in this craft and how their psyches and their understanding of what's going on. You have the balanced one who's Brad Pitt, who understands, he obviously has issues because, he supposedly killed his wife. Yeah. We never see it technically. So we're not sure. But everybody believes it. So, but he is definitely, some would say, more disciplined and well put together. And then you have Leonardo DiCaprio, the actor, who is just like trying to like absorb in his character and know his lines. And he gets on himself when he doesn't know his lines. And I've been there. And then you beat yourself up for like 3 hours and then you got to get over it. And they did all that. And then you have Sharon Tate, who's just in love with being an actress, in love with her life, and her life is going really well. And so when all of that stuff accumulates into one blowtorch and that sequence, and then him doing exactly what his character would do and kind of like, puffs up a little bit like, yep, that was me. That was me. Oh, you saw that movie? And he kind of downplays it. Oh, you saw that movie? Like, of course he saw that movie. He just said he saw that movie. It just made me chuckle. And once again, I was laughing in places that most people in the theater were like, why is that guy laughing? I mean, I laughed at Brad Pitt quite a bit, laughed with Brad Pitt quite a bit. So for me, I think this is just a celebration of the idea of what Hollywood was, what we think it was, and maybe what it should have been, and maybe what it will never be again. And it's like a really good fictionalized documentary with real human emotion. Not that documentaries don't have that, but it's kind of like, it doesn't 100% feel like a traditional narrative film. By the way, back to that one thing, not to digress again, but Tarantino never does that in this film. He does flashbacks, and obviously you mentioned a little while ago about the flashback inside the flashback, but he never does that Kill Bill thing. He never does that Pulp Fiction thing. He never does that out of whack thing. And to me, I celebrate that because I don't think I was looking for that in a film of his right now. I'm glad. And if this is the second to last of his films, if that is true, mark my words that 25 years from now, people will revel in this film and say how brilliant it was that he changed it up for this one. It's his film, but it's different than his other movies, and it will be celebrated for that fact. Mark my words. If he sticks to that 10 film thing.
Yeah. Oh, well, the other thing I did want to say is that at the very end, when he, it's kind of like the reward in some cases of him, talking with Jay Sebring, at the door, and then Margot Robbie, and then Margot Robbie's Sharon Tate calls down. I was like, is everything okay? And then the fact that she calls him up is kind of like, it's a lot of things. It's like, oh, we know you, we're a fan of yours, come on up and meet my friends, which I don't know. I'm not sure who the other people are there. I don't know the whole history of the Manson murders or anything, but the 4 people that are there, none of which are Roman Polanski, but the fact that he gets to know them, he will probably subsequently get to know Roman Polanski. Roman Polanski could use him in one of his movies. Like, it is a whole door, literally the gates, the doors are opening, and also figuratively and career-wise, the doors are opening for him. He just so happens to own the house next to one of the hottest directors in the world at that time, and he's now going up to hang out with them. So I think that, yeah, that's kind of like that is the cherry on top of the sundae right there.
The thing that makes it brilliant is Rick Dalton knows that.
Yeah.
Like when Sharon Tate calls out to them on the speaker box or says, hi, Rick, or whatever, she says something. You see this look on his face like, oh, she knows who I am?
Yep.
Oh, she knows who I am. And it's just like, it's such an actor thing to do. My God. It's brilliant.
Oh, that's cool. All right. Well, okay. That sounds good. I think you should definitely see it again. I mean, if you get a chance to see it again in the theater, you should, but because I picked up so much more the second time from the first time. So, all right, you can check us out on the web at actorandengineer.com. Go to facebook.com/actorandengineer, and you can tweet us at actorengineer, and we'll see you next time.